In all the previous cases when we built the image, we executed commands manually. Of course, when you are doing it in a DevOps environment or to make yourself productive, there are some other cool ways where you can script the image build process. So in this session, we are going to explore how you can automate the image build process so that you don't need to go there and then manually type different commands to create the image you want. To do that, I'm going to first create a folder called work. So you can give any name that you like. And inside this work folder, I'm going to create a file called Docker file. So I start Notepad and then paste some command. So these commands are available in a file location given in your lab document. So you don't need to type everything. So what I'm doing here is creating a special file called Docker file. So this says which base image that I want to base this image that I'm going to create. Then you are going to create, define something called the maintainer. You can define your email address or the company URL, something that you like to identify who maintained this image. Then you are going to run some commands that will get executed inside the container. For example, in this case, I want to install IIS web server. So I execute this PowerShell command. You can also copy files. So for example, I'm going to have a folder called my web relative to this Docker file, and then copy that content into inet pub www root folder. And finally, I'm going to tell what's the command that should run by default when I run this image. So let me save this file as Docker file inside the work folder. Important thing is that Docker file should not have any extension, and the spelling has to be Docker file like this. No extension, name should be Docker file. So save this file. So let me start a command line, and if you type cd work and go inside that folder and then type dir, you'll find that the Docker file has no extension. So how can we use this Docker file to build an image? So first, I of course need to create this my web folder relative to where I saved my Docker file. So let me create a folder called my web. And inside this my web, I'm going to create an HTML file. So I'm going to start Notepad, type some HTML code, HTML, the body. Let's type a message called hello world, let's say version 1. HTML is ready. Let's save this file inside my web called, let's say index.html. So you can have any files. It could be MSI files, PowerShell scripts, web application, looks good. So any file you can keep like this and copy into the container. So previously we used Docker copy, but in this case we are going to use Docker file to do that automation. To use Docker file to build a Docker image, what you need to use is this command called docker build. So if you type docker build, let's get some help, -- help. You'll find that it has some options available. So one of those options is the tag. So this tag can be used to specify the name of the image that will get created when this Docker build runs. So as of now, I have these images in my machine. So let me run Docker build, and I'm going to give a tag name. The name of the image I want to get created is called my web, let's say version 1. And the Docker file that I just created is relative to this folder, and it's inside this C work folder. So I'm going to put dot. So the Docker build knows where to find the Docker file. So it starts a build process where it's going to go there and then start image, start instance from Microsoft Windows Server Core, and then going to install the Windows feature web server, which is the IIS. And once it completes this installation, it's going to copy the files that I have mentioned in my Docker build file. So it's copied my web folder content into inetpub www root. So it successfully built this image. So instead of you need to manually go there and then type these commands, you can use this Docker file to automate it. You can find that it created an image called my web version 1. So the build process created this version. So what happens, let's say, if you change this file? So let's open Notepad and then open this index file. And instead of saying hello world version 1, let's say we need to have version 2. So this is a new version of the content that should go into the Docker image. So if you type, let's say, docker build t, in this case, I'm going to specify the name of the image as my web version 2. It realizes that it already had certain layers that it already built with Windows Web Server installed. And it's only going to copy the files, which is the delta change in this case, into the container and build that image. And if you type docker images, you will find that the version 2 build with the new index HTML file inside. So if you don't want that caching feature, you can specify that you don't want to have caching, so that Docker will go there and then build the image every time using the full set of commands that you have specified in the Docker file. Previously, we had a very simple build process where we ran only one single run command. So what happens if you have multiple run commands or very complex build process as I have simulated here? So in this case, you need to find an efficient way to build image. So let's first save this file as a Docker file. So like before, you need to give it the name as Docker file with no extension, save it. Let's open the command window and then type docker build. Give it a name like my web, let's say version 3. And the Docker file is relative to this folder. So we type dot, which will start building of this process. Of course, I have built this image before, so that's why it has some caching layers. And after a while, once this build is completed, it will say the build is successful. But if you go into Docker history, and view the history of my web version 3, you will realize it has created multiple layers for each run command. And each layer is sometimes about 40 megabyte, 38 megabyte. This may not be the most efficient way of creating images. So there's a different way that you can optimize this creation of image using some PowerShell feature. So instead of writing multiple run commands, I can bundle multiple run commands into a single PowerShell execution. So in this case, I'm going to say run PowerShell exe, and I give the PowerShell command that I want to run. So in PowerShell, of course, you can define multiple lines with colon /. And so this includes multiple execution of PowerShell commands, but in terms when the Docker look at it, it's just a single run command. So in this case, I'm going to install IIS web server, create a new directory, copy some files, all in single run command. So let's save this file again as a Docker file in the same location. I already have a file called Docker file in this, so let's give it the Docker file, no extension, replace it. And let's go into my command window again and then build this. In this case, let's tell it my web version 4. Docker file is in the same location, so I type dot, which will start building it. But instead of running 8 steps, now it's running only 4 steps. So you have reduced the number of steps that Docker execute to build this image. Your image is ready. If you go into Docker and then type Docker images, you can find the version 4 is built about 8 seconds ago. And if I type Docker history, of the image that I just created, which is my web version 4, you can find that it doesn't have a lot of layers, and the execution of single run command package all the content into one layer. So this is a very efficient way of building images instead of running multiple run commands.